The kitchen table was cold against my forearms, the kind of seeping chill that settles into your bones when the heating bill is 2 months overdue. It was 2 a.m. The only light came from the harsh blue-white glow of my laptop screen and the singular, flickering bulb above the sink that I hadn't had the time or the spare cash to replace. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the grit of a 16-hour workday under my eyelids. My hands, calloused and dry from the warehouse shifts I'd picked up on top of my office job, trembled slightly as I reached for the stack of mail. This was the ritual, the late-night shuffle of poverty, robbing Peter to pay Paul, deciding which utility company would send a threatening letter this month and which one would get the minimum payment. "Mark?" Elena's voice drifted down from the bedroom upstairs. It was soft, laced with that fragile, sleepy quality that usually made my chest tighten with a protective instinct. "Just finishing up the budget, Elle. Go back to sleep," I called out, keeping my voice steady. I didn't want her to worry. That was my job. I was the husband. I was the provider, even if providing meant drowning. "Okay, don't stay up too long. You know how my mom worries about you working so hard." The mention of her mother made my stomach turn over. 2 years. For 2 years, we had been funneling thousands of dollars toward her mother's specialized treatments for a rare autoimmune disorder. It had drained our savings, maxed out my credit cards, and finally forced me to take out a high-interest personal loan that felt like a noose tightening around my neck every 30 days. I looked at the spreadsheet. We were in the red. Again. I reached for the last envelope in the stack. It didn't look like a bill. It was a generic white envelope with a transparent window, looking like junk mail from a bank we didn't use. Usually, I would have tossed it, but desperation makes you thorough. I tore it open, expecting a credit card offer with a predatory APR. It wasn't an offer. It was a statement. Platinum rewards checking. The name on the account was Elena Vance, my wife. I stared at the paper, my brain lagging, trying to process the data. We didn't have a platinum account. We shared everything. We had a joint checking account that currently had $42 in it. Why did she have this? Maybe it was an old account she forgot to close. My eyes scanned down the transaction list, and the air left my lungs as if I'd been punched in the gut. October 12th, deposit $5,000. October 14th, the Sapphire Lounge, downtown, $450. October 15th, Hotel L'Evêque, weekend suite, $1,200. October 12th, I remembered that date. I remembered it because I had sat in the loan officer's cubicle, sweating through my dress shirt, begging for approval on a hardship loan because Elena had called me crying, saying her mother needed an emergency injection that insurance wouldn't cover. I had wired that money to her mother's account immediately. I looked back at the paper. The deposit matched the loan amount exactly. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a painful, irregular rhythm. This had to be a mistake, a bank error. Identity theft. I kept reading. November 3rd, deposit $3,500. The day I sold my grandfather's watch. November 5th, Men's Warehouse, $600. November 5th, Ticketmaster, Concert VIP, $800. I felt bile rise in my throat. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the linoleum, but I froze before I could storm upstairs. The anger was there, white-hot and blinding, but beneath it was something colder, a terrifying clarity. I sat back down. I needed to see the whole picture. I logged into our joint account, the one I monitored religiously. I pulled up the transfer history. Every time I had sent money to Mom's medical fund, an account number Elena had given me on a post-it note. It matched a deposit date on this secret statement. There was no sick mother. Or if there was, she wasn't seeing a dime of this money. I looked at the withdrawals again. Restaurants I couldn't afford to take her to. Hotels in the city where we lived. Men's clothing stores. Electronics. December 24th, the Gilded Steakhouse, $380. Christmas Eve. I remembered Christmas Eve. Elena had told me she was spending the night at the hospital by her mother's bedside. I had spent Christmas Eve alone in this cold kitchen, eating a ham sandwich, feeling proud of my wife's selflessness, feeling guilty that I couldn't do more. She wasn't at the hospital. She was eating steak, and she wasn't alone. You don't spend nearly $400 on dinner for one. I looked at my hands. The cracks in the skin from the warehouse boxes looked different now. They didn't look like badges of honor anymore. They looked like the marks of a fool. A gullible, used, pathetic fool. I heard the floorboards creak upstairs. Elena was getting up to get water. Panic surged for a second. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run upstairs and shake the truth out of her. But then I looked at the current balance on her secret statement. $12.45. She had spent it all. Every cent of the debt that was crushing me. If I confronted her now, she would lie. She would cry. She would make up a story about how she bought the clothes for charity or the hotels were for her mom's mental health. She was a master at spinning narratives where she was the victim. I folded the bank statement carefully and slid it inside the cover of my notebook. I turned off the laptop screen. When Elena walked into the kitchen a moment later, rubbing her eyes, looking soft and innocent in her oversized t-shirt, I was staring at the wall. "Mark," she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Are you coming to bed? You look like a ghost." I turned to her. It took every ounce of strength I possessed to keep my face neutral, to mask the absolute devastation ripping me apart from the inside out. "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "Just figuring out the numbers, Elle. Just looking at the cost of things." "Don't worry," she said, walking over and wrapping her arms around my neck. She smelled like expensive lotion. Lotion I probably paid for with a credit card that was currently maxed out. "We'll get through it. We always do." I didn't hug her back. I couldn't. "Yeah," I whispered, staring over her shoulder at the dark window. "We will." But I knew we was over. The only thing left was the debt and the woman who had sold my life to buy herself a fantasy. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to war. The next 3 days were a masterclass in dissociation. I woke up next to Elena, smelled the coffee she brewed, and kissed her cheek before leaving for work, all while a cold, heavy stone sat in the pit of my stomach. I was no longer just her husband. I was an undercover agent in my own life, gathering intelligence on the person who slept beside me. I maintained the routine. I complained about my back hurting from the warehouse shifts. I asked about her mother's white blood cell counts with a furrowed brow of concern. I watched her perform her grief, the sighs, the distant stares, the trembling lip, and felt a new, terrifying emotion. Disgust. It was a physical revulsion, like watching a magician explain a trick you already figured out. The magic was gone. Only the cheap mechanics remained. On Tuesday, I called in sick to the warehouse job, but put on my uniform anyway. I drove 2 towns over to a coffee shop with spotty Wi-Fi, opened my laptop, and began the excavation. The single bank statement I had found was the smoking gun, but I needed the bullet casings. I needed the full history. I knew Elena's passwords. She used the same variation of her childhood pet's name and her birth year for everything. It was a security risk I used to warn her about. Now, it was my key to the truth. Logging into the secret account was disturbingly easy. When the dashboard loaded, I wasn't looking at a bank account. I was looking at a diary of betrayal. I opened a blank spreadsheet next to the browser window. Column A, the lie. Column B, the truth. I pulled up our text message history on my phone and scrolled back 6 months. June 15th. Text from Elena. "Mom is having a bad reaction to the chemo. I need to drive down and stay with her for the weekend. I'm so scared, Mark." Bank transaction. June 15th. StubHub. 2 tickets. Front row. $600. Bank transaction. June 16th. The Ritz-Carlton. Room service. $180. I typed it into the spreadsheet. My fingers felt numb. On June 15th, I had eaten instant ramen for dinner because I didn't want to spend money on groceries while she was suffering at the hospital. August 2nd. Text from Elena. "The doctor says we need to pay for the new specialist up front. It's $2,000. Can we make it happen? I hate asking you this." Bank transaction. August 3rd. Delta Airlines, 2 round-trip tickets to Miami, $1,400. Bank transaction. August 3rd. Saks Fifth Avenue, $600. She hadn't just cheated on me, she had mocked me. She had used my love, my desperate need to be the hero for her family, as an ATM for her vacation. Every hour of overtime I worked, every lunch break I skipped, every drop of sweat I shed in that unair-conditioned warehouse had funded a flight I wasn't on and a hotel bed I didn't sleep in. I worked through the timeline for 4 hours until my eyes burned. The pattern was absolute. There was never a medical emergency, not one. Her mother's condition was stable. I knew that because I had spoken to her mom briefly on holidays, but Elena always insisted she didn't want to burden her mom by talking about the illness. It was the perfect cover. Then I found the anomaly. Starting in September, the erratic spending on hotels stopped. Instead, a consistent recurring withdrawal appeared on the first of every month. Metro City Properties, $1,850. I stared at the screen. $1,850. That was more than the mortgage on our house. I opened a new tab and searched for Metro City Properties. It was a management company for luxury loft apartments in the downtown arts district, the trendy area filled with galleries and bars, the kind of place Elena always said she wished we could afford to visit more often. My breath caught in my throat. Hotels were transient. Hotels were for flings. A lease was a home. She wasn't just sleeping with someone else. She was building a life with them. She was maintaining a fully furnished, secondary existence less than 10 miles from where I was sleeping. I looked at the date of the first payment, September 1st. That was the week I had taken out the second personal loan, the one with the predatory 18% interest rate. I had cried in the car after signing those papers, terrified we would lose our house if I couldn't keep up the payments. I had come home and Elena had held me, telling me I was the strongest man she knew. She had used that loan to pay the security deposit on her love nest. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to close the laptop. I rushed to the coffee shop's bathroom and dry heaved over the sink. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the dirty mirror. My eyes looked hollow. My skin was gray. I looked like a man who was dying. And in a way, I was. The man who trusted his wife, the man who believed in the sanctity of their vows, was dead. He died in that bathroom stall. I walked back to my table, my legs feeling like lead. I sat down and looked at the spreadsheet. It was full of data, dates, and amounts. It was irrefutable. But I needed one last thing. I knew what she was doing. I knew where she was doing it. But I didn't know who was enjoying the fruits of my labor. I looked at the transaction history again. There were purchases at video game stores, charges at a local climbing gym, and subscriptions to streaming services that I didn't watch. I pulled up the Metro City Properties website again. I wrote down the address of the building. I checked my watch. It was 4 p.m. Elena thought I was at the warehouse until 10 p.m. I packed up my laptop. I wasn't going home. I was going downtown. I needed to see the castle my slavery had built. I sat in my sedan, parked 3 blocks away from the Metro City lofts. The engine was off, but the ticking of the cooling metal sounded like a bomb counting down in the silence of the cabin. The arts district was alive around me. Couples walking hand in hand to overpriced tapas bars, artists hauling canvases, the vibrant pulse of a city I had been too busy working to enjoy. My eyes kept darting between the lit windows of the converted factory building and the printed bank statements spread across my passenger seat. In my head, I had built an image of the man who was stealing my wife. I imagined a silver fox, an executive vice president with a corner office and a jawline carved from granite. Someone who could give Elena the things I couldn't. European vacations, jewelry that didn't come from a department store sale, stability without the sweat. In a twisted way, that scenario would have made sense. It would have hurt, but it would have followed the logic of hypergamy. She would be leaving me for an upgrade. But the paper trail told a different, more confusing story. I looked at the transactions again, highlighting the ones that didn't fit Elena's profile. GameStop, $549.99. Supreme, $210. Vape City, $85.50. Dave & Buster's, $140. Elena didn't play video games. She hated the smell of smoke, even vapor, and she certainly didn't wear streetwear brands that catered to 20-year-old hypebeasts. A sick realization began to dawn on me. I wasn't losing my wife to a provider. I was subsidizing a dependent. I pulled out my phone. I didn't know his name, but I knew where they were. People these days have an addiction to broadcasting their location. I opened Instagram and searched for the geotag Metro City Lofts. The feed was full of aesthetic shots of brick walls, lattes, and sunsets from balconies. I scrolled, looking for anything familiar. I scrolled past influencers and aspiring models until my thumb froze. There it was. A photo posted 3 hours ago. It wasn't Elena. It was a selfie of a guy. He looked young, maybe 25 or 26. He had messy bleached hair, a neck tattoo peeking out from a designer hoodie, and a smug, relaxed grin that made my fists itch. He was holding a glass of amber liquid to the camera. The caption read, "Views from the penthouse. Living the good life. #blessed, #hustle, #grind." I zoomed in on the photo. In the background, slightly out of focus but unmistakable to me, was a tan leather purse sitting on a velvet chair. I had bought that purse for Elena's birthday 3 years ago. I had worked 10 overtime shifts to pay for it. I clicked on his profile. His handle was @Jace_vibes. I began to scroll through his life. It was a catalog of my stolen money. October 15th. A photo of him at the Hotel Levesque. The same weekend I thought Elena was at the hospital. He was wearing a plush robe, holding a room service tray. The caption, "Room service hits different when you don't look at the price tag." November 5th. A picture of him at the concert, the VIP section. He was wearing a new jacket, the one from Men's Warehouse on the bank statement. My stomach churned with a mixture of rage and humiliation so potent it tasted like battery acid. This wasn't a man, this was a boy, a jobless, aspiring influencer who was playing house with my wife because she was footing the bill. And who was funding her? Me. I was the sugar daddy in this equation, but I wasn't the one getting the sugar. I was the silent partner in a business of betrayal. I was waking up at 4 a.m., wrecking my back lifting crates, and eating stale sandwiches so this kid could play PlayStation and vape in a loft I was paying for. I kept scrolling until I found a post from 2 weeks ago. It was a close-up of his wrist resting on a steering wheel, Elena's car's steering wheel. On his wrist was a sleek black smartwatch. I grabbed the bank statement again. Best Buy, November 20th, $399.99. I remembered that day. I had come home with holes in my work boots. I had told Elena I needed new ones, but she had said we were too tight that month because of her mom's medication adjustment. So I had duct taped my boots. I walked around with wet socks for a week when it rained. I looked at the photo of Jace, smiling at his wrist, tagging it #NewToy. He was wearing my boots. He was eating my lunch. He was living my life, stripped of the responsibility and the pain. A dark laugh bubbled up in my throat, a sound devoid of any humor. It was the sound of a structure collapsing. The narrative of the struggling but noble husband shattered. I wasn't noble. I was a host organism. I looked up at the building. The lights on the 4th floor, the corner unit where the penthouse views would be, flickered. I could go up there. I could buzz every apartment until I got in. I could kick down the door and beat him until he understood exactly whose sweat paid for that hoodie. But violence would only land me in jail. It would give Elena the perfect victim story. She would tell the police I was abusive, unstable, paranoid. She would walk away with half of the nothing we had left, and I would lose my job. No. I needed more than just knowledge. I needed leverage. I needed to catch them in the act of the transaction itself. I needed to prove that the money wasn't just missing, but that it was being handed over under false pretenses. I took a screenshot of the watch photo. I took screenshots of the hotel room. I archived his entire feed. Then I started the car. I didn't turn on the headlights. I just let the car roll slowly away from the curb, slipping back into the darkness. I wasn't going to confront them tonight. Tonight was for hate. Tomorrow was for the trap. Elena had mentioned earlier that her mother might need a specialized treatment next week. I knew exactly what that meant. Jace probably wanted a new gaming system or a weekend trip. "Okay, Elena," I whispered to the empty car. "You want money? I'll give it to you. But I'm going to make sure I get a receipt." The request came 3 days later, exactly as I had predicted. It was Friday evening. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm beer, when Elena walked in. She was wearing her bad news face, shoulders slumped, hands wringing together, eyes wide and glistening with preloaded tears. "Mark," she started, her voice a practiced tremolo. "I just got off the phone with the clinic. Mom's numbers tanked. They want to try an experimental immune booster, but insurance denied it again. They need $2,000 by tomorrow morning to start the cycle." I took a slow sip of beer, watching her performance over the rim of the glass. It was impressive. If I didn't have a spreadsheet of her lies burned into my retina, I would have been reaching for my wallet already. 2,000, I repeated flatly. "That's everything we have left in the emergency fund, Elle, plus the rent money." "I know," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I feel terrible. I hate this. But it's her life, Mark. How can I say no?" I set the beer down with a solid thud. "You can't. We have to do it." She looked up, relief washing over her features so quickly it was almost comical. "Thank you. You're amazing. Can you transfer it to my account? I'll write the check to the clinic first thing in the morning." "No," I said. The air in the room stilled. "What?" "I'm done with transfers," I said, standing up and walking to the fridge. "The bank fees are adding up and the processing times are too slow. If it's an emergency, cash is king. I'll go to the bank tomorrow morning, pull the cash, and give it to you. You can drive it straight to the clinic." She hesitated. I saw the gears turning behind her eyes. Cash was riskier to carry, but it was also untraceable once it left my hand. It was perfect for her purposes. "Okay," she said slowly. "That works. You're right. Cash is faster." The next morning, I went to the bank. The teller looked concerned as I withdrew $2,000, money that was supposed to pay our landlord. I put the crisp bills into a thick manila envelope. It felt heavy in my hand, not with value, but with the weight of the betrayal it represented. I drove back home and found Elena waiting by the door, dressed in somber clothes, appropriate for a hospital visit. "Here," I said, handing her the envelope. "Tell your mom I'm praying for her." "I will," she said, kissing me quickly on the cheek. Her lips felt like ice. "I'll be back late. I'm going to stay with her until the procedure is done." "Take your time," I said. As soon as her car disappeared around the corner, I was moving. I ran to my own car, which I had parked on the side street facing the other way so she wouldn't see me follow. I knew she wasn't going to the hospital on the north side. She was heading downtown. I kept a 2-car distance, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Following someone isn't like in the movies. It's terrifying. Every time she tapped her brakes, I panicked. Every time she changed lanes, I thought she'd spotted me. But she was confident. She was driving with the ease of someone who had gotten away with this a dozen times before. She didn't go to the hospital. She didn't go to the Metro City lofts either. She drove to a trendy outdoor shopping center about 15 minutes from downtown, the Grove. She parked near a high-end coffee shop. I parked 3 rows back, keeping a large SUV between us. I grabbed my camera, a DSLR I used for work sometimes, and attached the zoom lens. I watched her get out of the car. The transformation was instant. The somber daughter act vanished. She checked her reflection in the side mirror, fixed her hair, and applied a fresh coat of bright red lipstick. She wasn't a grieving daughter. She was a woman on a date. She walked to the patio seating area and sat down. 5 minutes later, he arrived. Jace. In person, he looked even younger than his photos. He was wearing the jacket I had paid for. He strolled up to the table with a loose, arrogant gait. He didn't hug her. He just sat down and leaned back, putting his feet up on the empty chair next to him. Elena leaned in, speaking eagerly, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. He looked bored. He checked his phone while she talked. Then the moment came. Elena reached into her purse and pulled out the manila envelope, the one I had handed her less than an hour ago. She slid it across the table. Jace's demeanor changed instantly. The boredom vanished. He sat up, grabbed the envelope, and peeked inside. A grin spread across his face, a greedy, predatory smile that made my skin crawl. He leaned over and whispered something to her. Elena giggled, looking like a teenager with a crush. I raised the camera. Click. The shutter sound was silent inside my car, but the image was frozen forever. Elena handing the envelope to Jace. Click. Jace counting the bills openly at the table. Click. Jace leaning over to kiss her, his hand on the back of her neck, the envelope tucked firmly under his arm. I lowered the camera. I checked the display screen. The images were crisp, clear, and damning. There was no explaining this away. This wasn't a loan to a friend. This wasn't charity. This was a transaction. I sat there for a long time, watching them. They ordered drinks. They laughed. They were living in a reality where consequences didn't exist, funded by a man they thought was too stupid to notice. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The anxiety was gone. The doubt was gone. The man who loved Elena was gone, left back at the house with the unpaid bills. I started the car. I didn't need to see where they went next. I knew enough. I drove home in silence. I had the photos. I had the bank statements. I had the timeline. Now, I just had to set the stage. I walked into the house and went straight to the dining room. I cleared the table. I went to my home office and printed the photos I had just taken. I printed the bank statements. I began to lay them out on the dining table, arranging them in a perfect chronological grid. A museum of infidelity. I sat at the head of the table and waited. It would be hours before she came home with her stories of doctors and needles and suffering. I folded my hands on the table and watched the sun move across the floor. I was ready. The front door unlocked at 9:45 p.m. I hadn't turned on the lights in the dining room, sitting in the shadows with the evidence spread out before me like a tarot reading of our dead marriage. The street lamp outside cast a pale, sickly orange glow across the table, illuminating the glossy photo of Jace counting my money. "Mark?" Elena's voice echoed from the hallway. "Why is it so dark in here? I'm exhausted. The doctors were running tests all day." She walked into the dining room, dropping her keys on the sideboard. She reached for the dimmer switch, flooding the room with light. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I just sat there, hands clasped, looking at her. "Jesus, you scared me," she said, clutching her chest. Then her eyes dropped to the table. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I watched her gaze travel across the exhibit. First, confusion, then recognition. And finally, a sheer, unadulterated terror that stripped the color from her face. She saw the bank statements with the highlighted rows. She saw the printouts of the Metro City Loft's lease agreement. And she saw the photo taken just hours ago, her hand passing the envelope to Jace. "How is your mother?" I asked. My voice was soft, devoid of the rage I expected to feel. It was just empty. Elena swallowed hard. Her eyes darted around the room as if looking for an exit or a script. "Mark, what is this? You've been following me?" "I asked you a question," I said, leaning forward slightly. "How is your mother? Did the $2,000 help her immune system, or did it help Jace's sneaker collection?" "You don't understand," she stammered, taking a step back. "It's complicated. He's a friend of the family. He was helping me transfer the money because—" "Stop," I said. It wasn't a shout, but it cut through the air like a whip. "Do not insult my intelligence. Not now. Not after I've seen the math." I picked up the bank statement. $72,000, Elena, in 2 years. That's the number. That's the price tag on the lies. The loans I took out, the overtime I worked, the nights I spent awake wondering how we were going to eat. All of it went to him. to a kid who plays video games while I bleed for a paycheck. She realized the misunderstanding angle wasn't going to work, so she switched tactics. Her face crumpled, her bottom lip began to quiver, her eyes filled with tears instantly, a mechanism so well-oiled it was almost impressive. "I was lonely, Mark," she wailed, the tears spilling over. "You're never here. You're always working. You work double shifts. You come home tired. You never look at me anymore. I felt abandoned. Jace, he listened to me. He made me feel alive again. It was a mistake, I know, but I was just so lonely." She fell to her knees, grasping the edge of the table, looking up at me through wet lashes. It was the performance that had worked 1,000 times before. It was the save me look. I stood up and walked around the table. She reached out to grab my leg, but I stepped back. "Stand up," I said coldly. "Please, Mark. I'll end it. I swear. I'll never see him again. I love you. We can fix this." "Fix it?" I laughed, a dry, harsh sound. "There is no fixing this. You aren't crying because you're sorry, Elena. You're crying because the ATM just shut down." I pointed to the photo of Jace. "You told me your mother was dying. You looked me in the eye, watched me panic, watched me sell my grandfather's watch, and you didn't blink. You took that money and bought a PlayStation for your boyfriend. That's not loneliness. That's sociopathic." "I needed to feel special," she screamed, dropping the act for a split second, her voice shrill and ugly. "You're always so boring, always talking about budgets and bills. He made me feel like a queen." "He made you feel like a queen because I was paying for the crown," I retorted. "And now the treasury is empty." I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The night air rushed in, cold and biting. "Get out," I said. Elena stopped crying. She stood up, wiping her face, her expression hardening into something nasty. "You can't kick me out. This is my house too." "Actually," I said, picking up a document from the end of the table that she hadn't noticed yet. "It's not. The deed is in my name because your credit score was too low when we bought it, remember? And as for marital assets, given that you've embezzled $70,000 of marital funds, I don't think a judge is going to be very sympathetic to your housing needs tonight." I tossed the paper back onto the table. "You have a lease at the Metro Lofts. Go sleep there. Go sleep with Jace. Although I have a feeling he won't be as welcoming once he realizes the cash flow has stopped." She stared at me, her chest heaving. She realized I wasn't bluffing. The doormat husband was gone. "You're a bastard," she hissed. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm a debt-free bastard starting tomorrow. Leave, now, or I call your mother and tell her exactly why her daughter has been using her name to solicit funds." That was the final blow. The threat of social exposure, of her saintly mother finding out, broke her resolve. She grabbed her purse, the one I paid for, and marched to the door. She paused on the threshold, turning back one last time, perhaps to try a final plea, but my face was stone. "I hope you're happy alone," she spat. "I'd rather be alone than broke and betrayed," I said. I slammed the door, I locked the deadbolt, I put the chain on. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. The house was silent. For the first time in 2 years, the silence didn't feel heavy with worry, it felt clean. I walked back to the dining room. I gathered up the photos, the statements, the lies. I didn't burn them. I needed them for the lawyers. I put them neatly back into a folder. My hands were shaking, the adrenaline finally crashing, but I didn't cry. I had shed enough tears over this woman. I wasn't going to waste another drop. The morning after I kicked Elena out, I didn't go to work. I went to a divorce attorney recommended by a guy at the warehouse who had lost everything twice. I wasn't going to let that happen to me. I sat in a leather chair that smelled of stale cigar smoke and handed over the folder. The bank statements, the lease agreement for the loft, the photos of the handoff, and the spreadsheet correlating her mother's fake medical emergencies with Jace's shopping sprees. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson with eyes like a tired hawk, flipped through the pages in silence. He stopped at the photo of Jace counting the cash. "This is thorough," Henderson grunted. "Usually I have to hire a PI to get half of this. You've handed me a smoking gun, the bullets, and a signed confession. I want her off the deed. I want the debt assigned to her as dissipation of marital assets. I want a clean break, I said, my voice steady. We can do that, Henderson nodded. This is fraud, plain and simple. In this state, financial infidelity of this magnitude influences the division of assets. We'll file today. But the legal war was the easy part. The social war was dirty. By the time I got home, my phone was vibrating off the table. Elena hadn't gone silently into the night. She had gone on the offensive. She had called her sister, her best friend, and even my own mother, spinning a narrative so twisted it barely resembled reality. I opened a text from her sister, Sarah. I can't believe you. Kicking her out on the street because she spent some money on herself. She's depressed, Mark. She told me you were controlling her finances and threatening her. You need help. Another from our mutual friend, Dave. Dude, not cool. Elena called me crying, saying she's sleeping in her car because you went psycho over a credit card bill. Call me. She was painting me as the abusive, miserly tyrant and herself as the fragile, neglected wife who made a few mistakes while seeking comfort. She was weaponizing their empathy, just like she had weaponized my trust. I felt a flash of heat in my chest, the urge to call them and scream the truth. But I stopped. Screaming makes you look unstable. Screaming plays into her narrative. Facts are quiet. Facts are deadly. I sat down at my computer and composed a single email. I addressed it to Sarah, her parents, and the core group of friends she was currently manipulating. Subject: the reality of the situation. I didn't write a long, emotional diatribe. I wrote 2 sentences. I am not kicking Elena out because of a shopping addiction. I am filing for divorce because she stole $72,000 of borrowed money to fund a second life with another man while pretending it was for her mother's cancer treatments. I attached a single PDF file I named The Ledger. It contained the side-by-side comparison. The text message from Elena begging for money for mom's chemo, next to the bank transaction for Metro City Lofts and Men's Warehouse. It ended with the photo of Jace wearing the watch I paid for. I hit send. The silence that followed was heavy. For an hour, my phone was dead quiet. No texts. No calls. I imagined them opening the file. I imagined Sarah reading the dates. I imagined her mother seeing her own name used as a pawn to buy a 25-year-old boy designer sneakers. Then the phone rang. It was Sarah. "Mark," she said. Her voice was shaking. "Is this real?" "Check the dates, Sarah. Check the amounts. Call the bank if you want. It's all real." She told me the money was for a therapist, she said. Sarah trailed off, the realization of the betrayal hitting her. She used mom's illness. She actually used mom. "Every single time," I said. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mark." The tide turned instantly. The support system Elena relied on, the people she thought would bully me into taking her back, collapsed. They weren't just angry on my behalf. They were furious for themselves. They had been duped too. But the final blow didn't come from family. It came from economics. I had immediately canceled every credit card authorized to Elena. I closed the joint account. And crucially, I stopped the automatic transfer that paid the rent at Metro City Lofts. I knew Jace wasn't in this for love. He was a parasite, and parasites detach when the host body runs dry. That evening, I did one last check on Jace's Instagram. I expected to see him posting angry rants, or maybe a photo of him and Elena against the world. Instead, I saw a story posted 20 minutes ago. It was a video of Jace in the loft. He was packing bags. The caption read, "Moving on to bigger and better things. Negative energy ain't it. Hashtag single, hashtag grind, hashtag new chapter." I zoomed in. In the background of the video, I could see Elena. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands, looking small and defeated. Jace was ignoring her, filming himself in the mirror, preening. He was dumping her. The rent hadn't been paid. The credit cards were declining at the bar. The fun was over. And without the funding, Elena was just a baggage-heavy older woman complicating his lifestyle. He was discarding her like an empty wallet. I put my phone down. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a grim sense of validation. I had been right about him. I had been right about her. The doorbell rang a few hours later. It was insistent, desperate. I checked the peephole. It was Elena. She looked wrecked. Her mascara was smeared. Her hair was a mess, and she was shivering in the cold. She didn't have the confident swagger of the woman who handed over envelopes of cash anymore. She looked like what she was, a woman with nothing left. "Mark," she cried through the door. "Please, Jace kicked me out. He locked me out of the loft. I have nowhere to go. My mom won't answer my calls. Please, let me in." I stood there, my hand hovering over the lock. A part of me, the old Mark, the husband who would do anything to stop her pain, wanted to open it. But then I looked at the hallway where I had stacked the boxes of ramen noodles I'd been eating for months to pay for her affair. "You made your choice, Elena," I said through the wood, not opening the door. "Mark, please, I have no money. I'm cold." "You have a car," I said. "And you have a lot of expensive clothes. I suggest you sell them." I turned off the porch light, plunging the front step into darkness. Her sobbing continued for another 10 minutes, then footsteps retreated and an engine started. I walked back into the living room. The house was quiet. The war was over. Now, I just had to survive the peace. The ink on the divorce decree was barely dry when the for sale sign went up in the front yard. I couldn't keep the house. It wasn't just the memories that haunted the hallways, the ghost of Elena asking for money in the kitchen, the phantom echo of her fake tears in the bedroom. It was the math. The equity in the house was the only way to make a dent in the mountain of debt she had left behind. I sold it to a young couple who looked at the place with the same starry-eyed optimism I once had. I didn't have the heart to warn them. I just took the check, paid off the mortgage, and used the remainder to wipe out the credit cards Jace had maxed out on bottle service and designer hoodies. I moved into a studio apartment on the edge of town. It was a single room with a kitchenette that smelled perpetually of old cooking oil from the neighbors. My furniture consisted of a mattress on the floor, a folding card table, and a single plastic chair. This was my life now. The drama was over. The screaming matches, the legal filings, the vindication of exposing the truth. That was the movie part. This was the reality. This was the hangover. For the next 18 months, I lived like a monk serving a penance for a crime I didn't commit. I worked my day job at the office, and I kept the warehouse shifts at night. My existence narrowed down to a simple cycle: work, sleep, pay bills. Loneliness is a strange thing. When you're married to a liar, you're lonely because you're unheard. When you're divorced and broke, you're lonely because you are invisible. I stopped going out with friends because I couldn't afford to buy a round of drinks. I stopped dating because the idea of trusting someone with my heart, or my wallet, made me physically nauseous. I became a machine built for debt repayment. I ate rice and beans for dinner 5 nights a week. On Fridays, I splurged on a frozen pizza. I wore my work shirts until the collars frayed. Every time I wanted to buy something, a new book, a coffee, a movie ticket, I heard the number in my head: 30,000 left, 25,000 left. The hardest part wasn't the poverty, it was the anger. Some nights, lying on my mattress staring at the water stains on the ceiling, the rage would come back. I would think about Elena. I heard through the grapevine that she was living with her parents again, working a retail job, playing the victim to anyone who would listen. I would think about Jace, who had likely moved on to another Mark, another woman with low self-esteem and a credit limit. They were out there, living. And I was here, in this box, paying for their fun. I was paying for the hotel room where they slept together. I was paying for the champagne they drank to toast their cleverness. It felt like I was still being cuckolded every single month with every automatic withdrawal. But slowly, the numbers went down. The spreadsheet I used to track her lies became the spreadsheet I used to track my freedom. November, $15,000 remaining. February, $8,000 remaining. May, $2,500 remaining. It was a slow climb out of a deep pit. I learned to find solace in the silence. The sparse apartment, once a symbol of my failure, began to feel like a sanctuary. There were no lies here, no hidden accounts, no manipulation, just me and the truth. Then came the day. It was a Tuesday in August. The heat was stifling, and the air conditioner in my window unit rattled like a dying engine. I sat at the folding table and opened my banking app. I navigated to the personal loan number 402 tab. This was the medical loan. This was the big one. The $15,000 I had borrowed at 18% interest because Elena said her mother needed emergency surgery. The balance read $450. I checked my checking account. I had just been paid. The money was there. My finger hovered over the mouse. This was it, the final shackle, the last tangible connection to the woman who had nearly destroyed me. I clicked Pay in Full. Processing. The little wheel spun for 5 seconds. 5 seconds that felt like 5 years. Transaction successful. Remaining balance, $0. I stared at the zeros. I expected fireworks. I expected to jump up and cheer. I expected to feel a surge of euphoric joy. Instead, I just exhaled. A long, shuddering breath that seemed to empty my lungs of 2 years' worth of bad air. My shoulders dropped 3 inches, the tightness in my chest, a knot that had been there since the night I found the envelope, finally uncoiled. I closed the laptop. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city was moving, indifferent to my victory. But it looked different to me. The colors seemed a little sharper. The noise seemed a little less oppressive. I walked to the fridge and took out a beer, a cheap, domestic can. I cracked it open and took a long sip. It tasted like champagne. I was broke. I was living in a dump. I was 35 and single. But I was free. I looked around the empty room. It wasn't a prison anymore. It was a blank canvas. For the first time in a long time, I didn't think about what I owed. I thought about what I could build. I sat back down in the plastic chair, stretching my legs out. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I would ever trust again, but I knew one thing for sure. The next dollar I earned was mine. 2 years is a long time in the life of a credit score, but it feels even longer in the life of a human heart. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon in October. I was standing in the aisle of a high-end grocery store, the kind where they play classical music and the produce is arranged like art. I looked down at my cart. It contained a bottle of Cabernet that cost more than $12, fresh salmon, and asparagus. Tonight, I was cooking dinner for Claire. Claire was different. She was a nurse I'd met 6 months ago. She knew about the debt, the divorce, and the trust issues. She didn't try to fix me. She just walked beside me. When we went out to dinner, she reached for the check not to emasculate me, but because we were partners. It was a foreign, terrifying, wonderful concept. I reached for a jar of artisanal pesto, checking the price out of habit, then tossing it in the cart anyway. I wasn't rich, but I was solvent. The studio apartment was a memory. I was renting a decent 1-bedroom with a balcony now. I had savings. I slept through the night. "Mark?" The voice came from behind me near the bakery section. It was familiar, yet distorted, like a song played on a warped record. I froze. My grip tightened on the handle of the cart. I turned around slowly. Elena stood there. It had been nearly 3 years since I kicked her out, and 2 since the divorce was finalized. The change was startling. The Elena in my memory was glossy, vibrant, always dressed in the latest trends I had unknowingly paid for. The woman standing before me looked faded. She was wearing a coat I recognized from our marriage, but the hem was fraying. Her hair, once professionally colored every 6 weeks, was pulled back in a messy bun, the roots showing gray. But it was her eyes that held the most damage. The spark of entitlement, the gleam of the manipulator, was gone. It had been replaced by a dull, weary caution. "Hello, Elena," I said. My voice was steady. No anger, no fear. Just a simple acknowledgement of a person I used to know. I didn't know you shopped here," she said, shifting her weight awkwardly. She was holding a plastic handbasket. It contained a loaf of store-brand bread, a carton of milk, and a single frozen dinner. "I live nearby," I said. "You look good," she said, her eyes scanning me, taking in the new jacket, the healthy weight I'd put back on, the absence of the dark circles that used to define my face. "You look rested." "I am," I replied. "How are you?" She let out a short, brittle laugh. "Oh, you know, getting by. I'm working at a receptionist desk over in the medical park. It pays the bills, mostly." She looked down at my cart, eyeing the wine and the salmon. I saw a flash of the old envy, but it was weak, lacking the energy to sustain itself. "I heard about Jace," I said. I hadn't meant to, but it slipped out. She flinched. "Yeah, that didn't last long. Turns out he wasn't really into long-term, or commitment, or jobs." She looked up at me, and for a second, her mask slipped completely. "I really messed up, didn't I, Mark?" It wasn't a manipulation tactic this time. It wasn't a performance for money. It was just a fact, stated in the harsh fluorescent light of a grocery store aisle. I looked at her, really looked at her. I thought about the hate I had carried for so long. I thought about the nights I spent wishing her ill, wanting her to suffer as I had suffered. But seeing her now, diminished and trapped in the mundane struggle of her own making, I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel vindication. I just felt a profound sense of distance. She was a stranger who shared a history with me, like a car wreck I had survived years ago. "Yes," I said softly, "you did." I didn't offer forgiveness. I didn't tell her it was okay, because it wasn't. It never would be. But I didn't need to rub salt in the wound. The universe had already handled the sentencing. "Well," she said, adjusting her basket, "I should go. Mom is, well, she actually is sick now. For real this time. I have to drop this off." The irony hung in the air between us, heavy and sad. The boy who cried wolf, the wife who cried cancer. "Take care of yourself, Elena," I said. "You too, Mark." She turned and walked away toward the checkout. I watched her go. Her shoulders were slumped. She looked small. I turned back to my cart. I finished my shopping. I paid with a debit card that had a healthy balance. I walked out to my car, a used but reliable sedan that I owned outright. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. I watched the shoppers coming and going. I thought about the $72,000. It was a fortune. It was years of my life. It was a price that, at the time, felt like it would kill me. But as I watched Elena get into an old, dented compact car across the lot, I realized the ledger had finally balanced in a way I hadn't expected. I had paid with money. I had paid with sweat, stress, and time. It was a high cost, yes, but I had replenished the account. I had earned it back. My debt was zero. My conscience was clear. Elena had paid with something else. She had paid with her integrity. She had paid with the trust of everyone who ever loved her. She had spent her character to buy temporary comfort, and when the money ran out, she was left with a deficit that no bank loan could cover. You can rebuild a bank account. You cannot rebuild a soul that is rotted from the inside out. I started the car and put it in drive. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the dashboard. I thought about Claire waiting for me. I thought about the salmon I was going to grill. I thought about the truth and how light it felt to carry. I merged into traffic, leaving the grocery store, leaving Elena, and leaving the past in the rearview mirror where it belonged. I wasn't just debt-free, I was free, and that was worth every penny.